Howdy y'all, this is Diwari with Uniquely Average Gamers, and we're going to be diving into more Destiny. The topic of this video is going to be the Sunsinger. The Sunsinger is one of the subclasses you have access to at a Warlock. You do not get access to the subclass until you've reached level 15 in the game. Now all this footage is going to be from the beta test, specifically the PlayStation 4, which was the platform I played on. Now in the beta you could only get to max level of 8. Now, as we mentioned earlier, you need to be level 15 to get access to the Sunsinger, so we didn't actually get to get our hands on a Sunsinger. However, we did get to view its entire skill tree, which is accessible in the character equipment screen. So, going over the abilities, which we're going to be doing here in a moment, gave us an idea of what the archetype of this character will be. And that is essentially a damage-based class that's going to have some crowd control abilities, and some abilities that are going to enhance the overall damage output of your raid group. The damage from this class is going to be primarily solar damage, which is fire damage, and a lot of their damage spells are going to be damage over time effects, but we're going to talk about the intricacies of that later on. Now, in the past, Bungie has hinted that this is going to be kind of a support, and even said that it might be a healing class. Nothing in the skill tree indicated that. There were no group-based heals, and there was only one or two abilities that actually increased the damage capabilities of your raid. The descriptions of the skills are vague, so of course this is subject to change when the endgame comes out and we can see it in action, but for now, the archetype presented is that of a fire-based damage over time effect class that has crowd control and some abilities that boost the damage output of your raid. The first thing we should note is that you're going to be using primarily solar damage as a Sunsinger. That is, in essence, fire damage, and unsurprisingly, there are a lot of damage over time effects, which, if you haven't guessed by now, I am a big fan of. Starting with Solar Grenade, which creates a flare of solar light which continually damages enemies trapped inside of it. Now this sounds a lot like the Vortex field that the Voidwalkers get, in the sense that it's explode on impact and it causes damage over time in an AoE field, but also note that it says enemies trapped inside of it, hinting that it's going to debilitate enemies and hopefully enemy players. Now next up you get the Firebolt Grenade, which is described as a grenade that unleashes bolts of solar light at nearby enemies. Now this is kind of vague. We don't know how this mechanic will work. It could be damage all at once, or it could be multiple damage hitting them over time. We just have to see it. After that you get Fusion Grenade, and this is going to be very similar to the Covenant Grenade from the Halo series in the sense that it's a sticky grenade that's going to cause additional damage to enemies that it's stuck upon. Now that's useful in boss fights, it's useful against heavy enemies, it's useful in PvP, and it's also very, very anti-vehicle, so bear that in mind if you take that into the battlefield. Now the next column is dedicated to the double jump ability for the Sunsinger, which is Glide, very similar to the Voidwalker's Glide, except you upgrade it differently. Now Glide, essentially you get extra height or extra distance if you use a double jump. Now you are exposed while you are this floaty, so if you press jump a third time you will descend. As you upgrade it you can increase its control or give it an initial boost of speed. Now one thing that Glide is lacking when you first get it is that initial boost of speed. It takes you a little bit longer to get the distance than it does compared to the other double jump abilities. So we hope that's going to be good. Now the final ability you get for it is Balance Glide. Balance Glide sounds like it's going to be more of a jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to the glide abilities. But if it is the combination of the two, then that could be the best one. We don't know yet. Next up, you got Radiance. Radiance is the supercharge ability for the Sunsinger class, and it fills your character with solar light, which dramatically increases the damage output of your abilities. That means your melee and your grenades. Now, we do not know if this is also going to increase weapons damage, nor does it mention about any sort of buff to allies around you, so we don't know if Radiance is going to work that way. However, Song of Flame is going to be the first upgrade you get, and it's going to significantly decrease the cooldown of your teammates' abilities, their supercharge, their grenades, and their melees. So this can increase the damage output of your raid for a little bit of burst damage if you need to destroy an exposed core of a boss, or if there's any situation that calls for burst damage. Next, you have Radiant Skin, which is going to significantly decrease the damage that you take while Radiance is active. Again, we don't know if this is individualized to the Sunsinger or if this is shared with party members. But we also want to ask if that's going to stack with Ward of Dawn, which is the Defender supercharge, to make you even more survivable. Now, the final ability you get is Fireborn, and this is essentially a self-resurrection. If you don't use your supercharge and you die, and then use your supercharge after you die, this is going to bring you back to life. We do not know if this is going to work in PvP, as that could have a little bit of a balance issue to it, but in a PvE scenario, that can just bring you right back to life. For instance, if there was something that wiped your raid and you need to have someone still alive, that's your failsafe. Now next we have Scorch, and Scorch is the Sunsinger's signature melee ability. It's described as a powerful melee attack that's going to leave a damage over time effect on the enemy. Now this means that you're going to have to get up close to the enemy if you want to optimize your DPS. Now to help you do that, you get Flame Shield, which is going to start by marginally buffing your armor stat on the bars above, but it's also going to make it so when you kill an enemy with Scorch, you're going to get a little protective shield around you, so you can get in there, get dirty, and start throwing up some Scorches. After that, you get Solar Wind. This is going to have a lot of PvP utility. This is going to make it so that Scorch is going to knock an enemy back. Now remember, when they're knocked back, they're still taking damage from this damage over time, so if someone gets the jump on you, that can help you turn the tide. Now finally, you get Brimstone, which is going to cause enemies that are killed by Scorch to explode. So this is going to be very good for things like the Hive, where they attack you in mass. It does seem as though it's going to be lacking in PvP utility when compared to the knockback of the Flame Shield, but we hope we're wrong about that. Now after that, you get into the Arcane column. This is where you just pick whether you want to do armor and recovery, or recovery and agility, or any mixture, really. As we always say, just pick whichever one works best for you, your playstyle, and your context. Now the next column, we start to see skills that are a little bit more interesting. Starting with Radiant Will. Radiant Will is going to increase the duration of Radiance, which is pretty self-explanatory, but remember, we don't know the duration of Radiance to begin with, so we don't know the practicality of Radiant Will until we actually get to see the game in action. But after that, you get Viking Funeral, and this is something that I'm actually quite excited for. Essentially, enemies that you ignite now burn for longer and for more damage. Now this is going to have synergy with a spell we're going to talk about here in a moment that's later on in the tree. But if this is going to have a significant multiplier to it, that could be the skill that is going to significantly buff you as a damage over time class. Now lastly, you get Sunburst, which is just going to cause enemies killed by Scorch to potentially drop an Orb of Light. We don't know by what percentage this chance is increased, so the jury's kind of out on this one. And you see me going over the orders right now. These just further increase your armor, your recovery, or your agility. Like we always say, pick which one works best for you. Now in the final column, we get two of the most interesting skills in the entire tree, starting with Touch of Flame, which is going to cause your grenades to ignite enemies, leaving a damage over time effect on the enemy. Now we do not know if this damage over time effect is set at a particular amount of damage, or if the grenade type and damage is going to increase the amount of the damage over time effect. A lot of questions there, but if you combine that with Viking's Funeral from earlier, then all of a sudden you have significant amounts of single target DPS taking place. Next you have Angel of Light, which is going to marginally increase your agility stat on the bar above, and it's also going to allow you to hold in place while you aim down the sights while jumping. Jury's kind of out until we can see the duration on that one. Now finally you get to Gift of the Sun, and Gift of the Sun might be the most interesting skill on the tree, and here is why. Gift of the Sun gives you an extra grenade. Now, this sounds good because if the extra grenade has an independent cooldown, then that means that you have just reduced your grenade cooldown overall by 50%. You throw your first grenade, you wait for your bar to get back to 50% on the first grenade, and then you throw your second grenade. And then you just keep alternating the two grenades as they both hit 50%. All of a sudden, discipline is not as important to the Sunsinger, and all of a sudden you become a significant powerhouse of DPS on both AoE and single target. So, combining that with Radiance and a heavy machine gun and throw another dot in there with Scorch, you can see that the single target DPS on the Sunsinger has incredible potential. But we don't know until we see it. Now, when it comes to stats, you have the same stats as every other class. You have Intellect, which is going to decrease the cooldown of your Supercharge. You have Discipline, which is going to decrease the cooldown of your Grenade. You have Strength, which is going to decrease the cooldown of your melee ability. And you have Light, which is going to further increase you above the max level of 20. So, we don't want to theorize on what the best stat is until we can see damage numbers and, of course, the Sunsinger in action. Now, when it comes to weaponry, of course, just pick whichever weapon style works best for you. But keep an eye on the element of that weapon. Now, the reason we say that is because as a Sunsinger, you're going to be primarily doing solar-based damage, which is fire damage. Now, fire damage is not effective against shielded enemies. So, if your weapon has arc damage, which in this game is the name for lightning damage, then all of a sudden you can peel the enemy's shields off of them and lay into them with your fire abilities. Now in the final game, the potency of the damage over time effects is still unknown, so it could make it so shields are irrelevant, but we're just planning ahead at this point in time. Now when it comes to PvP, we can only speculate until we see the final game. However, the tree does give us a few clearly defined pros and cons to Sunsinger PvP. For cons, we first have Radiance. Radiance gives no indication that it boosts weapon damage, nor the damage of nearby teammates. If it is indeed the case that Radiance buff only your abilities and no weapon damage whatsoever, then it's a tough sell when compared to the other supercharges. Also, Sunsingers lack in mobility when compared to their Voidwalker counterparts. The Sunsinger can increase its jump speed, jump control, and even hover in a given spot should you spec into Angel of Light. But the PvP capabilities of the Voidwalker's Blink give more versatility and mix-up to your gameplay. There are still redeeming qualities to the Sunsinger, however, particularly in the field of grenades. Remember, Gift of the Sun does give you 2 grenades, so you can therefore be slinging grenades more often in case you miss or are outnumbered. The Sunsinger Solar Grenade is also described as being able to trap enemies, so you can hypothetically control players, block doorways if you're securing a node, or even trap some vehicles. Scorch is also going to have some usefulness in PvP. The initial hit can take their shields away just enough to have that dot that is left by Scorch kill the enemy. That could be very fantastic for that post-mortem satisfaction kill. Now, Flame Shield could be a very useful enhancement to Scorch if it does indeed mitigate enough damage. Conversely, the knockback given to Scorch by Solar Winds could be very useful both offensively and defensively in PvP. Not to mention, if there's an enemy standing a little bit too close to the edge, you can send them off into the abyss. So in conclusion, the Sunsinger is shaping up to be a very enjoyable class that brings a lot to the table when it comes to your raid group. They can leave damage over time effects on enemies, they can crowd control enemies with Solar Grenade, and depending on which way they go in Radiance, they can either significantly increase the burst damage of your raid at a given notice, or they can self-resurrect, allowing you to recover from that untimely wipe. In PvP, Gift of the Sun and Scorch might give you the extra edge, but we still want to see the Sunsinger in action in PvP before we can make an actual decision. I do hope that this video was helpful. We do appreciate every single view that we get. If it was enjoyable, give it a like, a comment, or a subscribe. Check us out on Twitter at UA Gamers. This has been Diwari with Uniquely Average Gamers, and you're definitely going to see me on the inside of Destiny. Take it easy.